Right now, in the last second, your eyes captured somewhere around 10 million bits of visual information. Your brain kept about 40 of them. Everything else, gone, deleted before you even noticed it existed. And that gap, that quiet little massacre happening behind your eyes every single second, is the reason you can walk past your own car in a parking lot. It's the reason you can read a paragraph and forget it instantly. And it's the reason for something much stranger that we're going to get into, something that means the version of today living in your memory tonight is not the day that actually happened. By the end of this, you're going to understand why your brain does this on purpose, why it's not a flaw, and why one specific trick can make it stop happening to the things that actually matter to you. Let's start with the number, because the number is the part nobody believes at first. In 1960, a psychologist named George Sperling ran an experiment that's still taught in university labs today. He flashed a grid of 12 letters on a screen for 1/20th of a second. Just a blink. Then he asked people what they saw. Most could only report 4 or 5 letters. It looked like the brain simply couldn't hold more than that. But Sperling had a hunch, so he changed the test. This time, right after the flash, he played a tone. A high tone meant report the top row, a low tone meant report the bottom row, and suddenly people could do it, almost perfectly, every time. Here's what that means. The letters weren't gone. All 12 were sitting there in the brain, fully visible, for a fraction of a second. But by the time a person tried to speak the answer, most of it had already vanished. The visual information doesn't fail to arrive. It arrives in full, and then it gets deleted before you can even use it. That's called iconic memory, and it lasts about 250 milliseconds, less than the blink of an eye. In that quarter second, you're holding a nearly photographic image of the world in front of you. Then it's gone, replaced by the next quarter second, and the next, on a loop that never stops as long as your eyes are open. So if your brain is capturing that much detail constantly, where does it all go? This is where it gets uncomfortable, because the answer isn't storage, it's deletion. On purpose. Think about what your eyes are actually doing right now. You're not looking at one still photo. You're taking in motion, light shifting, colors changing, shapes moving at the edges of your vision. If your brain tried to store every frame of that at full resolution, you would need a hard drive the size of a small planet just to get through breakfast. So evolution did something smarter. It built a brain that assumes almost everything it sees doesn't matter and only stops to actually save the stuff that does. That's not a bug, that's the entire operating system, and there's a name for the part of your brain that runs this filter. It's called the thalamus. And more specifically, a structure inside it called the reticular nucleus. Neuroscientists sometimes call it the brain's bouncer. Every piece of sensory information, sight, sound, touch, has to pass through this checkpoint before it's allowed anywhere near your conscious awareness. The bouncer's job is brutal and simple. Is this new? Is this dangerous? Is this relevant to a goal you already have? If the answer to all three is no, it gets turned away at the door. You never even know it tried to get in. This is why you can drive home from work and arrive with almost no memory of the drive itself. Your eyes saw everything, every car, every light, every pedestrian. Your bouncer looked at nearly all of it and said, "Seen this before, not a threat, not relevant, denied." What's left in your memory is a handful of moments. Maybe a song that came on the radio. The other 40 minutes just didn't make the cut. Maybe a near miss at an intersection. Now, here's the part that should really bother you. If your brain is deleting almost everything and only keeping a small, filtered sample, then what you remember about today isn't actually today. It's a reconstruction, a highlight reel assembled from fragments, stitched together after the fact to feel like a complete story, when really it's more like a movie made from a handful of photographs. And this is where the story of a man named Henry Molaison comes in, because his case is the reason we understand any of this at all. In 1953, Henry underwent surgery to stop severe seizures. Surgeons removed a part of his brain called the hippocampus on both sides. The seizures got better, but something else broke in the process, something nobody fully expected. Henry could no longer form new long-term memories. He could hold a conversation just fine. He could do math, tell jokes, recognize faces he already knew. But the moment a new experience ended, it was erased completely. He'd meet the same doctor every single day for years, and every single day, it would be like meeting them for the first time. Henry lived like this for over 50 years, and in that time, he became one of the most studied patients in the history of neuroscience because his brain proved something researchers had only suspected. The hippocampus is the filing cabinet. It's the structure that takes the tiny surviving fragment of information that made it past the bouncer and decides whether it's worth writing down permanently. Without it, Henry's bouncer still worked. He still experienced his days in full, moment to moment. But nothing ever got filed. Nothing ever got kept. Which means memory isn't really about what you see. It's about what gets written down after the seeing is done, and most of the time, almost nothing does. So why do some moments survive and others vanish without a trace? There's a clue in something that happens to almost everyone, and you've probably experienced it without ever thinking about why. Ask someone where they were on an ordinary Tuesday 3 years ago, and they'll draw a blank. But ask them where they were during a major earthquake, or the day they got a call that changed everything, and the details come flooding back. The smell in the room, what they were wearing, what song was playing. This is called a flashbulb memory. And it's the clearest proof that your brain has a switch it can flip when something matters enough. That switch runs through a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. When something emotionally intense happens, fear, joy, shock, this one, write this one down in permanent ink. It's the same mechanism, at a smaller scale, every single day, which is why you remember the one time you almost got hit crossing the street, but not the 400 other times you crossed it safely. Emotion isn't just a feeling attached to a memory. Emotion is the thing that decides if the memory gets to exist at all. But emotional intensity isn't the only key that unlocks the filing cabinet. There's a second one, and it's the one you actually have some control over. It's attention. Here's an experiment that will change how you think about your own memory. Researchers at Harvard ran a study now famous as the invisible gorilla test. Participants watched a video of people passing a basketball and were told to count the passes. Halfway through, a person in a full gorilla suit walked directly through the middle of the group, thumped their chest, and walked off. Nearly half the participants never saw it, not because their eyes missed it in plain view. They missed it because their attention was locked somewhere else, and the bouncer decided the gorilla wasn't relevant to the task, so it never made it to conscious awareness at all. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. It's not just that your brain deletes what you don't pay attention to. It's that you can look directly at something, in full clarity, and never know it existed. Attention isn't a spotlight that helps you see better. It's the gatekeeper that decides what's real to you and what simply isn't. So put these two things together. Emotion decides what gets remembered by force. Attention decides what gets remembered by choice. And almost everything else, the other 90%, gets processed for a quarter of a second and thrown away like a piece of scrap paper. Which brings us back to today. This actual day you're living right now. By tonight, most of it will be gone. Not stored somewhere you can't access. Gone, never written. The version of today that survives into your memory will be built from maybe a dozen moments your brain decided were emotionally charged or worth your focused attention. Everything else, every hallway you walked through, every face you passed, every sentence someone said to you that didn't quite land, all of it will be deleted before your head hits the pillow. That sounds bleak, but it's actually the opposite. Because if memory worked by accident, you'd be stuck with whatever your brain happened to notice. But it doesn't work by accident. It works by attention, which means you can influence what survives. There's a name for this in memory research. It's called levels of processing, and the short version is this. The more deliberately you engage with a moment while it's happening, the more likely your hippocampus is to file it away permanently. Not passively watching, actively noticing, naming what you're seeing in your head, asking yourself a question about it. Even just pausing for 2 extra seconds to actually look at something instead of letting your eyes slide past it. That tiny act of attention is the difference between a memory that exists in 20 years and one that never existed at all. Think about what that means for a moment you're in the middle of right now. Not a special occasion, not a milestone, just an ordinary Tuesday, the kind your brain is built to erase by default. If you actually stop, actually look at the person across from you, actually notice the light in the room or the exact words they just said, you are doing something your brain doesn't do on its own. You're overriding the bouncer. You're telling the hippocampus, this one counts, file it. Most people go through entire decades on autopilot, and years later, they'll say it went by so fast, and what they really mean is almost none of it got written down. Not because nothing happened, because nothing was noticed. So here's the thought to sit with. Your brain has already decided that 90% of today doesn't matter enough to keep. That decision is happening right now, in the background, without asking your permission. But the 10% that survives isn't chosen by fate. It's chosen by what you were paying attention to when it happened. Which means the story of your life isn't actually made of everything that happened to you. It's made of the handful of seconds you were fully there for. And the harder question isn't why your brain deletes so much. It's how much of today you're about to lose, and whether you're going to notice in time to stop it. So the next time you forget why you walked into a room, don't panic. That's not a memory problem. That's your brain looking at an empty kitchen and correctly deciding it wasn't worth the storage space.